Before it is too late, you must hear this, not with the ears, but with the quiet awareness behind them. Life does not shout its deepest truths. It whispers them in moments of stillness, in pauses between thoughts, in the gentle unease that tells you something essential has been overlooked. Most people spend their lives preparing to live. They gather knowledge, beliefs, methods, and hopes, yet never arrive at the simplicity of being. They wait for the right moment, the right condition, the right understanding. But truth does not wait. It reveals itself only to those who stop running long enough to notice that what they seek has always been present. There comes a point when outward searching becomes a burden, when effort exhausts the soul, when the mind realizes it cannot think its way into peace. This is not failure, it is an invitation to release the belief that truth exists somewhere else, in someone else, or at some future time. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is fullness unrecognized by thought. In silence, the false sense of separation dissolves. The self that struggled, feared, and resisted begins to loosen its grip. What remains is awareness, whole, complete, untouched by time or circumstance. If this realization is delayed too long, life itself becomes the teacher through discomfort, loss, and repetition. Not as punishment, but as mercy. Because the soul will not allow itself to be ignored forever. You are not here to perfect a personality. You are here to awaken from one. The moment you stop trying to fix yourself, you begin to discover what was never broken. The moment you stop asking how to reach truth, truth steps forward and reveals that it has always been carrying you. Do not wait for tomorrow to listen. Tomorrow is a concept created by the mind to delay surrender. Now is the only moment where awakening happens. Now is where fear ends and understanding begins. Before it is too late, hear this clearly. You were never meant to struggle your way to peace. You were meant to recognize it, rest in it, and live from it. The urgency of awakening is not created by time, age, or circumstance. It is created by awareness itself. There is a quiet pressure within every human being that knows when life is being postponed. It is the subtle knowing that something essential is being delayed while attention is given to routines, ambitions, and distractions that promise fulfillment but never quite deliver it. This urgency is not fear-based. It does not shout or threaten. It simply persists, patiently reminding the soul that postponement has consequences. Distraction is rarely dramatic. It arrives as responsibility, entertainment, improvement, and even spirituality practiced as accumulation. Over time, these distractions solidify into habit, and habit becomes identity. One begins to believe that this constant movement is life itself. Awakening feels less urgent when comfort exists, when suffering is manageable, when tomorrow seems guaranteed. Yet the cost of delay is subtle erosion. Sensitivity dulls, wonder fades, the inner listening weakens. Awakening is urgent because unconsciousness compounds. Each day lived mechanically reinforces the belief that this is all there is. The longer truth is delayed, the more effort it seems to require, not because truth moves away, but because the mind builds thicker layers around it. What was once simple becomes difficult. What was once obvious becomes abstract. There is also a gentler reason for urgency. Awakening is not merely escape from suffering, it is entry into life as it actually is. To delay awakening is to delay intimacy with existence itself. It is to live at a distance from one's own depth. Many people reach the later stages of life realizing they were present for events but absent from meaning. They remember schedules, not moments. Achievements, not awareness. Truth does not demand urgency because it is fragile. It demands urgency because life is brief and attention is precious. Every moment spent asleep is a moment lived secondhand. Awakening restores immediacy. It returns experience to its original clarity before interpretation and judgment harden it into something smaller. The invitation is always now. But now is often sacrificed for preparation. People believe they must resolve their problems before awakening, not realizing awakening is what resolves the sense of being a problem. They wait to become better, calmer, more spiritual, unaware that waiting itself is the barrier. Urgency does not mean force, it means honesty. It means recognizing that postponement is a decision, even when disguised as patience. Awakening asks for willingness, not perfection. It asks for attention, not achievement. The moment this urgency is felt and honored, life begins to soften. Not because circumstances change, but because consciousness steps forward and claims its place at the center of experience. Truth is not something added to the mind, it is something uncovered within consciousness. From the earliest stages of life, attention is trained outward. We are taught to gather, compare, memorize, and repeat. Knowledge becomes a possession, and understanding is measured by how much can be explained or defended. Yet this accumulation, while useful in practical matters, creates a subtle illusion in the inner life. The belief that truth must also be acquired in the same way. What is discovered outwardly always remains separate from the discoverer. It can be lost, challenged, replaced, or forgotten. Inner truth is different. It does not arrive as information but as recognition. When it is seen, it feels strangely familiar, as though remembered rather than learned. This familiarity is the signature of genuine insight. It carries a quiet authority that does not argue or persuade, it simply is. The mind, however, resists this inward turn because it cannot control it. Thought prefers conclusions it can manage and labels it can repeat. Inner knowing dissolves these structures. It asks for stillness instead of effort, receptivity instead of analysis. In this stillness, attention relaxes from its habitual outward reach and begins to sense what has always been present beneath activity. Remembering truth inwardly does not mean rejecting knowledge or experience. It means recognizing their limits. Concepts can point, but they cannot deliver. Words can indicate direction, but they cannot substitute for seeing. When truth is mistaken for belief, it becomes fragile. When it is remembered inwardly, it becomes self-validating. There is a moment in inner listening when seeking exhausts itself. Questions fall away not because they are answered, but because the one asking them softens. In that softening, awareness reveals itself as complete, not in need of improvement or justification. This realization does not make one superior or separate, it makes one transparent. Life flows without resistance because the false center that demanded control loosens its hold. This inward remembering is often mistaken for passivity, yet it is profoundly alive. Action arises from clarity rather than compulsion. Choices are made without anxiety because they are not driven by the need to secure identity. Truth, once remembered, does not require constant reinforcement. It expresses itself naturally in simplicity, kindness, and presence. The tragedy is not ignorance but distraction from this inner recognition. Many spend their lives refining opinions while neglecting awareness. They speak fluently about truth while remaining strangers to its stillness. The invitation is not to learn something new, but to unlearn the habit of looking elsewhere. When attention finally rests within, it discovers that nothing essential has ever been missing. What was sought in teachers' systems and explanations reveals itself as the silent ground of experience itself. This remembering is not dramatic, it is gentle, ordinary, and irreversible. Once seen, it does not demand belief. It quietly reshapes the way life is met, moment by moment. Silence is often misunderstood as absence, a void where nothing happens. In lived experience, it is the opposite. Silence is the condition in which everything real becomes perceptible. When noise subsides, not only the noise of the world but the constant commentary of the mind, a different quality of listening emerges. This listening is not strained or intentional. It is relaxed, open, and unguarded. Most people believe they are listening when they are actually preparing to respond, evaluate, or interpret. This habit keeps attention moving, never allowing it to settle. Silence interrupts this momentum. It does not demand effort, it removes interference. In this removal, awareness discovers its own depth. One begins to notice that beneath thoughts, emotions, and reactions there is a steady presence that has never been disturbed by them. True hearing happens in this depth. Words, events, and even inner impressions are received without distortion because there is no rush to categorize them. Meaning reveals itself naturally. This is why silence is a doorway rather than a destination. It is not something to achieve but something to enter by ceasing unnecessary movement. The mind often resists silence because it feels like loss of control. Without constant thinking, identity seems to weaken. Yet this weakening is precisely what allows understanding to deepen. What falls away in silence is not intelligence but the compulsion to interfere. What remains is clarity without strain. In silence, guidance does not arrive as instruction. It appears as alignment. Actions feel appropriate without being planned. Decisions emerge without inner conflict. This is not intuition as impulse but as harmony between awareness and circumstance. The more one trusts this quiet attunement, the less life feels like a problem to solve. Silence also reveals the difference between truth and noise. Many beliefs persist simply because they are never questioned. In silence, they lose their urgency. Some dissolve entirely. Others are seen for what they are, temporary tools mistaken for ultimate realities. This discernment does not require analysis. It happens through direct seeing. The doorway of silence is always available yet rarely used. People wait for ideal conditions, a quiet place, a perfect schedule. Silence does not depend on outer arrangements. It is accessed by inward permission. A single moment of non-resistance, of letting experience be as it is, opens the door. Hearing in silence is not mystical or dramatic. It is intimate and practical. It restores sensitivity to life as it unfolds. It allows one to respond rather than react, to perceive rather than project. Over time, silence ceases to be an experience and becomes a background presence, steady and reliable. When silence is honored, understanding matures naturally. There is less need to explain, convince, or defend. Life is met directly without the filter of constant interpretation. In this simplicity, the essential is heard clearly, not as sound or thought, but as knowing that requires no words. The danger of postponing inner transformation lies not in what is lost outwardly, but in what gradually hardens inwardly. When transformation is delayed, life does not pause in understanding, it continues in repetition. Patterns repeat, reactions solidify, and the same inner conflicts replay under different names. What once felt temporary becomes familiar, and familiarity is often mistaken for acceptance. In this way, postponement disguises itself as normal living. There is a quiet numbing that happens when inner change is deferred. Sensitivity dulls, not because awareness disappears, but because it is ignored too long. The heart learns to protect itself from disappointment by lowering expectation, and the mind learns to tolerate unrest by calling it reality. Over time, this tolerance becomes a kind of resignation. People stop asking deeper questions not because answers were found, but because asking feels inconvenient. Postponement creates the illusion of control. It tells the individual that transformation can be scheduled, managed, or approached when conditions improve. Yet inner life does not respond to external readiness. It responds to honesty. When honesty is delayed, inner tension grows. This tension often expresses itself as restlessness, boredom, anxiety, or a vague sense that something essential is being missed, even when life appears successful. Another danger of delay is that identity becomes increasingly invested in its own continuity. The longer one lives from a constructed self-image, the more energy is spent maintaining it. Transformation then feels threatening, not because it destroys something real, but because it challenges what has been defended for so long. What could have been a gentle shift becomes a crisis simply due to resistance accumulated over time. Life itself compensates for postponement by increasing intensity. Experiences become sharper, losses more personal, questions more unavoidable. This is not punishment, it is balance. When inner movement is resisted, outer circumstances apply pressure. What could have been understood through insight must then be learned through experience. This is the costliest form of education, not in suffering alone but in missed simplicity. There is also a subtler loss in delay, the loss of immediacy. Inner transformation restores direct contact with life. When postponed, existence feels filtered, as though lived through memory and expectation rather than presence. Moments pass without being touched. Relationships are navigated through habit rather than attention. Even joy becomes conditional, dependent on outcome rather than awareness. Postponement thrives on the belief that transformation requires dramatic effort or complete readiness. In truth, it requires only willingness. The smallest inner honesty opens the door. The danger is not that transformation is difficult, but that delay makes it appear so. When inner change is continually deferred, the soul does not abandon its calling, it simply waits in discomfort. This waiting grows heavier with time, not because truth withdraws, but because resistance strengthens. The longer awakening is postponed, the louder life must speak to be heard. Letting go of ego identity is often misunderstood as loss, as though something valuable must be sacrificed or erased. In lived experience, ego is not a thing to be destroyed but a pattern to be seen. It is the collection of roles, memories, defenses, and narratives that the mind uses to create a sense of continuity. This structure forms early and serves a purpose, yet over time it is mistaken for the self itself. When this mistake remains unexamined, suffering becomes inevitable, not because life is cruel, but because identity is fragile. Ego identity depends on comparison and control. It must constantly measure, protect, and justify itself. Even its successes are unstable, because they require repetition and recognition to remain convincing. When circumstances threaten this structure, fear arises. When circumstances support it, anxiety follows, because what is gained can be lost. This cycle is subtle and exhausting, and most accept it as normal simply because it is shared. Letting go does not mean rejecting personality or denying experience. It means loosening the belief that identity is fixed and central. When this belief softens, reactions lose their intensity. Criticism no longer feels like an attack, and praise no longer feels like confirmation of worth. Life begins to move with less resistance because it is no longer filtered through the need to defend an image. If ego identity is not released gently through awareness, it eventually collapses through pressure. Life provides countless opportunities for this collapse: loss, failure, aging, change. These moments are not mistakes, they are invitations. When resisted, they produce bitterness and contraction. When understood, they produce freedom. The suffering associated with ego is not punishment, it is feedback. The longer ego identity is protected, the more painful its undoing feels. What could have been a quiet insight becomes a dramatic struggle. The mind clings harder, arguing for its own importance, mistaking familiarity for truth. In this clinging, energy is drained from presence and invested in maintenance. Living becomes heavy, not because life is demanding, but because identity is overburdened. Letting go restores simplicity. Experience becomes immediate rather than personal. Thoughts arise and pass without defining the one who notices them. Emotions move freely without being stored as stories. Action happens without the constant question of how it reflects on the self. This does not lead to passivity, it leads to clarity. Decisions are made without inner conflict because they are not negotiating with an image. Ego fears dissolution because it equates disappearance with death. Awareness knows otherwise. What falls away is not being, but tension. What remains is a natural intelligence that does not need protection. When identity is held lightly, life feels less like a test and more like participation. Suffering diminishes not because problems vanish, but because there is no longer a rigid center insisting on control. Living from divine awareness rather than personal struggle is not a shift in belief but a shift in center. Most human effort is spent managing life from a limited sense of self, a personal doer who assumes responsibility for outcomes, meanings, and worth. From this position, life feels heavy. Every decision carries anxiety, every mistake feels personal, and every uncertainty demands resolution. This way of living is exhausting because it asks a finite identity to handle an infinite process. Divine awareness does not mean withdrawal from life or denial of responsibility. It means recognizing the deeper intelligence in which life is already unfolding. When awareness becomes the reference point rather than personality, effort relaxes. Action still happens, but it is no longer driven by fear or self-justification. There is a sense of being moved rather than pushing, of responding rather than controlling. Personal struggle thrives on resistance. It resists uncertainty, discomfort, and change. Divine awareness allows these movements without interference. This allowance does not make one passive, it makes one aligned. Energy that was previously spent in opposition becomes available for clarity. One begins to notice that many struggles were never necessary, only habitual. Living from awareness brings a quiet confidence that does not depend on success. This confidence is not arrogance, it is stability. When outcomes are no longer used to define identity, they lose their power to disturb. Success is enjoyed without attachment. Failure is met without collapse. Both pass through awareness without leaving residue. There is also a change in how others are perceived. From personal struggle, relationships are often transactional, shaped by need, fear, or expectation. From awareness, relationships become encounters rather than negotiations. Listening deepens. Compassion arises naturally, not as a moral effort but as recognition of shared being. Conflict softens because there is less insistence on being right. Divine awareness does not promise comfort, it promises truth. Sometimes this truth asks for surrender where the mind wants control. Sometimes it invites stillness where the ego wants action. Trust develops not because life becomes predictable, but because awareness proves reliable. It remains present in pleasure and pain alike, untouched by either. Over time, living from awareness simplifies existence. Priorities clarify without analysis. What matters becomes obvious. What does not falls away without struggle. There is less need to explain oneself, less urgency to arrive somewhere else. Life is met as it is, moment by moment, without the demand that it be different. Personal struggle insists that peace must be earned. Divine awareness reveals that peace is the ground from which effort arises. When this is seen, striving loses its grip. Action becomes an expression rather than a defense. Life flows with a sense of rightness that cannot be manufactured, only allowed. In this allowing, living becomes less about surviving experience and more about participating in its unfolding. What has been offered is not a teaching to be mastered, but a remembering to be allowed. Awakening is not postponed by lack of effort, but by misplaced attention. When urgency is honored, when truth is sought inwardly, when silence is trusted, and when postponement is released, life begins to reveal its natural order. Ego loosens not through struggle but through understanding, and what remains is a quiet awareness capable of living without resistance. This awareness does not remove challenges, it removes the false center that made challenges personal. From this shift, life is no longer endured or managed but met directly. Action becomes simple, presence becomes steady, and meaning arises without pursuit. Nothing new is acquired, yet everything essential is rediscovered. Before it feels too late, there is always this moment, where listening replaces seeking and being replaces becoming.